Hello. Today we must take an extremely serious and impartial look at what is happening on the Ukrainian battlefield as of January 20th, 2026. If we truly want to understand the essence of this conflict, we must discard liberal rhetoric and focus on hard facts, on material power, and on the brutal logic of attrition. What we are witnessing today is a classic demonstration of how a great power uses its resource advantage to methodically destroy the enemy's capacity to resist. Let us begin with the big picture. We hear statements from Volodymyr Zelensky and reports from various sources claiming that Ukraine is on the verge of a massive Russian strike. But as a realist analyst, I must tell you not to be deceived by terminology. What is described as a future mass strike is, in reality, a permanent condition of this war. Russia launches hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles every day. These are not isolated attacks. This is a strategy of 1,000 cuts. The current escalation indicates that Russian command has decided to deal a decisive blow to Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Almost all thermal and hydroelectric power stations have already been knocked out. Only nuclear plants remain. Here we see an important tactical detail. Russia is unlikely to strike the reactors themselves because that would create unacceptable risks. Instead, they target the substations that supply these plants. This is strategic strangulation. Without energy, a modern army and its rear cannot function. This is attritional warfare in its purest and most brutal form. Moreover, there are signs that decision-making centers, especially in western Ukraine, and warehouses storing Western weapons, will become targets. This is a direct signal to NATO. Logistics chains are not invulnerable. When we look at Odessa, we see internal decay within the Ukrainian state. Videos showing recruitment officers grabbing people off the streets without due process reveal a deep shortage of manpower. In a war of attrition, population is just as critical a resource as ammunition. When a state resorts to such methods, it means the balance of power has irreversibly shifted. Now let us turn to the front line, starting in the south, the Kherson direction. Here we see a positional deadlock that nevertheless requires enormous Ukrainian resources. The front line has not changed for years, but the intensity of fire remains extreme. Russian aviation strikes areas between the Inhulets River, Tokarevka, and Taginka. Barrel artillery hits Kherson daily. This is a war of technology. Drone crews on both sides hunt every possible target. Although territorial changes are minimal, this direction serves to pin down Ukrainian forces, preventing them from transferring reserves to more critical sectors like Donbass. Moving to the Orekhov direction, we begin to see dynamics. Russian troops have reached the river and are conducting assault operations in northern Primorskoye. In modern warfare, advances are often confirmed with delays of several days. But the general trend is clear. The Russian army has cleared the pocket between Pavlovka and Malya Sherbaki. They are pressing toward Magdalinovka and Zapasnoye. In Malaya Tokmachka, we observe a classic pendulum effect. Russian forces entered the center, then Ukrainian counterattacks attempted to push them out. But the reality is that Ukrainian assault groups operate in small numbers and suffer disproportionate losses under artillery and drone fire. It is a strategic mistake to hold every meter of ground at the cost of destroying trained units. On the Gulyai-Pol axis, the situation is also deteriorating for Kiev. Russian troops are expanding their control zone west of the city. Despite Ukrainian claims of counterattacks, facts show Russian forward positions becoming increasingly entrenched. In this type of war, territorial control is often determined by artillery's ability to suppress the enemy's will before infantry even approaches. And here Russian firepower superiority is decisive. Now we turn to the Pokrovsk direction, perhaps the most dynamic and important sector. Here we see not just claims, but video-confirmed advances. Vast territories east of Pokrovsk have fallen under Russian control. Fierce fighting is underway near Grishino. While Ukrainian propaganda speaks of counterattacks, the map shows the opposite. Russian forces are advancing towards Solnechny Lane, expanding their control zone. On the Dobropol salient, the situation is no less critical. In the new Donbass and Belikoye areas, Russian troops have concentrated their main efforts. If New Donbass falls, the supply route to Belikoye will be cut. This will open the road to Dobropol, a key logistical hub. Ukraine is losing cities not because its soldiers fight poorly, but because the Russian suppression machine operates at higher capacity. An important note on the Konstantinovka direction. Russian forces have strengthened control over the highway on the eastern entrance to the city from Stupatsky. This is classic supply-cutting tactics. Without ammunition resupply and rotation, any defense is doomed. Here I must digress about the fog of war and the role of technology. We use maps from American companies like Google. But if you look closely at satellite images, you'll notice a strange pattern. Areas under Russian control are frequently updated, showing destruction, while areas under Ukrainian control look untouched, even though we know fighting is happening there. This is deliberate. It hides Ukrainian fortifications. This is an information war running parallel to the real one. Moving north to the Slavyansk and Krasny Liman directions, we see Liman falling into operational encirclement. Russian forces bypass it from two sides, through forests to the west and from the southeast. All supply roads are under fire control. Soon we will see pocket clearances and frontline leveling west of Zarekhnoi. For Ukrainian command, this is checkmate. Retreat means admitting defeat. Staying means condemning troops to destruction. Kupiansk remains a zone of fierce clashes. Despite Ukrainian statements of pushing the enemy back, video evidence shows Russian groups in the northern and eastern parts of the city. In the north, near Dedityarnaya and Nestornaya, a serious breakthrough occurred. Russian forces advanced several kilometers, showing how stretched Ukrainian defenses are. Finally, the Sumy direction. We see expansion of control zones near Grabovskoye and Vysokoye. Russian troops occupy new positions in residential areas, effectively erasing the old demarcation line. This creates constant pressure and forces Kiev to keep significant forces here instead of Donbass. I want to emphasize that what we see on January 20th, 2026 is not a random set of events. It is the result of a fundamental imbalance of power. Russia has superiority in artillery, aviation, ammunition, and most importantly, the ability to absorb the costs of a long war. Ukraine, despite heroic resistance, is reaching the limits of its physical and technical capabilities. Western aid can slow the process, but it cannot change the basic geography and demography of the conflict. We are witnessing the slow but relentless destruction of Ukrainian statehood and its military machine. This tragedy was predicted by realism. Until great powers sit at the negotiating table recognizing each other's security interests, this map will continue turning red meter by meter, city by city. We must also look at psychology and strategy in this war of attrition. When I speak of numbers and maps, I remember the political will behind them. Russia has clearly put its economy on a war footing in ways the West underestimated. Thousands of drones are not just purchases, but mass production. Strikes on energy are part of a long-term plan to turn Ukraine into a non-viable state. No electricity means no economy. No economy means no army. This is brutal arithmetic. Returning to Odessa and mobilization. Why does this matter geopolitically? Because legitimacy, in the eyes of the population, is also power. When mobilization becomes manhunting, the social contract collapses. This creates a risk of internal collapse before military defeat. History shows armies collapse when soldiers stop believing in the rear, and the rear fears its defenders more than the enemy. On fronts like Orekhov and Pokrovsk, we see a meat grinder tactic. Russian command does not rush. They use shell superiority to grind down positions before infantry moves in. This minimizes their losses and maximizes defender losses. Ukraine is forced to throw reserves into these grinders to hold symbolic settlements. That is the trap. Around Liman and Kupiansk, we see a more flexible Russian strategy. They no longer storm cities head-on. Instead, they encircle, cut logistics, and create unbearable defense conditions. When Liman falls into a fire pocket, its fall becomes only a matter of time. And casualties Kyiv is willing to sacrifice. In the north, Russian raids and gray zone expansion stretch the front. Ukraine has limited combat brigades. If they plug holes near Sumy and Volchansk, they cannot advance in Zaporizhia or defend Pokrovsk effectively. This is strategic exhaustion of maneuver capability. We must also consider time. January 20th, 2026 is midwinter. Frost and power shortages hit Ukrainian society harder than missiles. Russian forces adapted to long positional war. Ukrainian infrastructure is near collapse. NATO continues arms deliveries, but quantities and quality no longer change the battlefield. This becomes support for prolonging agony. From a realist view, Ukraine is used to weaken Russia. The price for Ukraine is catastrophic. Every red spot on the map is not just territory lost, but failure of Western containment strategy. We believed sanctions and weapons would stop Russia, but we forgot the fundamental rule. When vital security interests are at stake, a great power goes to the end. Russia showed willingness to pay any price. Ukraine, caught between Western interests and Eastern determination, loses maneuver space daily. We must prepare for even larger changes in coming months. If Pokrovsk collapses, all Ukrainian defense in Donbas will fall like dominoes. Then the question will not be about 2022 borders, but how much territory Kyiv will retain at all. War tests will and resources. Today, Russia's resources seem more sustainable and its will unshakable. Every delay in recognizing reality only increases the final cost. Continuing, let us focus on what I call the architecture of collapse. In Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka, we see systematic dismantling of Ukrainian logistics. Logistics is everything. Brave soldiers without ammo, food, medicine become targets. Cutting roads and pressuring Dobropol strikes the system's nerves. Once nerves fail, the organism dies. Why no single decisive strike? Because modern reconnaissance and precision weapons make WW-style breakthroughs too risky. Instead, Russia chose the slow roller. They force Ukraine to choose between bad and worse. Either retreat into open fields to be destroyed by aviation, or stay in cities and get encircled. Strategic zugzwang. Now about Western aid. January 2026 shows NATO's limits. Western industry is not ready for war of this intensity. You can supply tanks and missiles, but not people. The manpower deficit seen in Odessa is Ukraine's Achilles heel. You cannot train a soldier in 2 weeks for modern war. Mass mobilization of unprepared men only raises casualties and lowers morale. Information war is also critical. Satellite image manipulation creates illusion of stability for Western audiences. But soldiers know the truth. Russian drones find them regardless. This gap between propaganda and reality is deadly for any regime. Look at Liman. Its fall opens the road to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk from the north. Every Russian advance creates new fronts Kyiv cannot cover. Russia uses geography and numbers to force battles where Ukraine is weakest. Aviation matters. Glide bombs change the game. Russian aircraft strike without entering Ukrainian air defense range. Fortifications become temporary. You can dig the deepest bunker, but a 1.5-ton bomb solves it. Ukraine has no answer. For Russia, defeat is existential. For the West, this is prestige and peripheral interests. History shows who wins when stakes differ. Washington thought Russia would retreat under economic pressure. Instead, it adapted and hardened. By spring 2026, if trends continue, the front will fragment into isolated pockets. Without unified air defense, stable energy, and manpower, Ukraine will face painful choices. Peace talks may appear, but terms will be dictated by battlefield winners. War is not a Hollywood film. In geopolitics, good is what serves your interests. Russia defends its interests with all power. Ukraine became a victim in a great power game. This tragedy could have been avoided with more realism and less ideological blindness in the West. We see the old order burning in Pokrovsk and under missile strikes in Kherson. The world is changing, and its price is measured in lives and a country's future. Quantity turns into quality. Russian attrition strategy now bears fruit. Fatigue of Ukrainian units reached critical levels. An army is a system. When all elements wear out simultaneously, it fails. Security dilemma matters. Ukraine strengthens positions with Western tech. Each step triggers Russian response. FPV drones and electronic warfare made the battlefield transparent. Advantage goes to the side that can replace losses faster. In Dobropol and Pokrovsk, Russia forms conditions for left flank collapse. Once cities fall, only open steppe remains. Defense becomes impossible. This is chess. Removing pieces in space until mate is inevitable. International context. January 22, 2026 sees growing Western doubts. NATO resources are not infinite. Every frontline failure and forced mobilization video undermines war supporters. Allies abandon sinking ships when costs exceed benefits. In Sumy and Kharkiv, Russia applies soft military pressure. Raids stretch Ukrainian forces. Every soldier in Sumy is one not in Pokrovsk. Russian command distributes pressure coldly. Destroyed infrastructure is not collateral. Turning cities into fortresses creates ruins. If Ukraine continues this strategy, it will become a landscape of ruins. Liberal ideology demands fight to the end, but national survival contradicts it. Wars rarely end with total victory. They end when one side cannot continue physically. Dynamics show Ukraine heading there. Russia retains cohesion and escalation ability. Strategic depth of Ukrainian defense is exhausted. Not only people shortage, but quality of remaining troops. Russia rotates fresh units. Ukrainian brigades stay months without replacement. This causes burnout and loss of combat ability. Near Donetsk-Dnipropetrovsk border, Russian advance threatens logistics and ability to form new defense lines. Pokrovsk was the foundation of southern Donbass defense arc. With its fall, Ukraine loses the last major hub. Russian military industry surpassed Soviet levels in key areas. Shell and missile production outpaces the West. Firepower advantage 5-1 or 7-1 decides wars. If you fire 10,000 shells, an enemy fires 1,000. Their defenses turn to dust. Russian rear stability matters. Despite sanctions, economy adapted. Redirected east. Invested internally. Kremlin can continue indefinitely. For Russia, this is life and death. For the U.S., just another project. In Kupiansk and Liman, Russian forces destroy river crossings, isolating areas. Bridges destroyed, pontoons under fire. Ukrainian troops face trap, hold without supply or retreat under fire. Politically, tensions grow in Kyiv. Zelensky wants to hold territory for Western support. Military sees retreat as necessary. Classic political versus military conflict. History shows when politicians command battalions against war logic, disaster follows. Belarus plays a role. Russian grouping there forces Ukraine to keep tens of thousands of troops on the northern border. Another stretching element, energy war. By January 2026, Ukraine's grid no longer exists as a single system. It became islands fed by nuclear plants. Industry stopped. Rail transport disrupted. Modern states cannot function without electricity. Western strategy to strangle Russia failed. Instead, Ukraine is strangled. Mistake was seeing Russia as a gas station with rockets. Russia is a great power with total war experience. It adapted faster than expected. New weapons appear. Ground robots. AI command systems. Russia leads due to production capacity. In Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, Russia built layered defenses. Ukraine lacks air superiority. F-16s cannot change the picture. Another Western illusion, wonder weapons. Odessa and Mykolaiv matter. Port strikes stopped grain exports. Ukraine loses last currency income. Becomes fully dependent on Western funding. Western enthusiasm fades. In the U.S., inflation, border crisis, polarization dominate. American voters care less about Pokrovsk than gas prices. By January 2026, Russia controls most territories it deems vital. Appetite grows. Moscow may aim to cut Ukraine from the Black Sea and create a land corridor to Transnistria. Realistically logical. West's main mistake? Pushing Ukraine into unwinnable conflict. Promised NATO membership and support, but failed to provide material equality. Used Ukraine as a battering ram, which broke. In coming weeks, fighting will intensify. Russia will consolidate before spring mud. Possible Dnipro crossings or strikes on Western transport networks. Goal: paralyze reserves. International system is anarchy. Only law is force. Today, force is on Russia's side. Not fair morally, but factual. Ukraine must seek peace on today's terms because tomorrow will be worse. Nuclear deterrence matters. This war happens under nuclear shadow. That prevents NATO intervention. Russia signaled readiness to use all means. The West understands no aid is worth nuclear apocalypse. Ukrainian rear cities suffer blackouts, cold, water shortages. Social fabric collapses. Mothers protest. Human endurance limit reached. Demographic crisis worsens. Millions left. Thousands dead or disabled. Who will rebuild Ukraine? The future is lost in Donbas trenches. Russian strategy in 2026 combines military pressure and psychological exhaustion. They seek no quick wins. Time is their ally. Global South shifts. China, India, Middle East, Africa did not join sanctions. They see Western hypocrisy. Russia builds alliances. Isolation failed. Slavyansk and Kramatorsk are last fortresses. Their fall means end of organized resistance. Preparations for encirclement are visible. Information is also a weapon. Russia uses drone videos, POW interviews, frontline reports to demoralize. It works. Realism teaches the world as it is, not as we want. Reality. January 2026. Russia wins the war of attrition. Ukraine could not change geopolitics laws. NATO will not fight Russia directly. That means the finale will be written in Moscow. Peace terms will be harsh. Neutrality, demilitarization, territorial losses. Bitter pill. The longer Kiev delays, the less remains. Now we return to Pokrovsk. This is where the fate of the campaign is decided. Advances towards Solnechny Lane and Grishino are destruction of the last defense line built for years. Once broken, Russian mobile groups enter operational space. West of Pokrovsk, there are no strong fortifications until the Dnipro. On the Dobropol salient, Russian pincer tactics force Ukrainian units to watch their rear. Supply convoys become drone targets. Destroyed equipment litters roads. This is a graveyard of hopes. Near Liman, operational encirclement is already a fact. Russian forces control heights and roads. Ukrainian group is extremely vulnerable. Any counterattack is suicide. In Sumy, expansion near Grabovskoye and Vysokoye shows Russia won't limit itself to Donbas. Buffer zone creation is strategic. For Ukraine, this pursuit is Kriyen de Kreen. This means hundreds of kilometers of new front. They lack free divisions. Territorial defense units of elderly and untrained recruits are sent. Against regular Russian troops, they have no chance. Western elites are tired. as long as it takes turns into how do we end this? Support continues by inertia, but volumes decline. Energy situation is a separate chapter. Striking substations feeding nuclear plants is virtuoso brutality, reactors untouched, but results same, blackout. Plants shut down. Even peace tomorrow means decades of restoration and hundreds of billions. Ukraine becomes deindustrialized agrarian territory, matching Russian goals to strip great power. Potential. In attrition war, time is also resource. Russia can wait. Economy adapted, society consolidated, army learns. Ukraine exists under stress, economy artificial, population exhausted. Time balance favors Moscow. China factor matters. Beijing watches closely. Economic and diplomatic support for Russia matters. Unipolar world ended. As of January 22, 2026, Russian result: territorial control, enemy destruction, own stability. Ukrainian result: losses, destroyed economy, dependence. Intensity will grow. Russia smells victory. Ukraine will resist desperately, but without radical change, position worsens. This tragedy was predicted years ago. Turning Ukraine into a Western bastion led to its destruction. Sadly, forecasts came true. We continue analysis based on facts. Thank you for your attention. We must face the truth, however bitter. Only then can we understand the real nature of geopolitical shifts changing our world today.